It's fun to be free, to be on the move, to go anywhere with never a care to.
Welcome aboard the Walt Disney World Express monorail, your highway in the sky to the Magic Kingdom.
Please, don't worry. Whatever you say, yes, ma'am, aye, aye, sir, okie dokie.
There's so much to do, getting ready just for you. Everybody's busy bringing you a Disney afternoon. Hey!
Welcome to a little bit of Florida here in California. This is where the early planning is taking place for our so-called Disney World project.
Right now, we're leaving the world of today behind. So if your imagination is ready, here we go.
WDW Radio, your information station.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your Walt Disney World information station. I am your host, Lou Mongello, and this is show number 501. And I'm here once again, not only to help you have the best possible vacation experience when you come to the parks, but I also want to bring you a little bit of Disney magic wherever you are with my books, audio tours, the WDW Radio blog, special events, and more. You can find everything over at WDWRadio.com. This week, we're going to look at Walt Disney, the person, not the persona, as we explore some of the stories behind the storyteller with 10 things you didn't know about Walt Disney. The man, not the brand. From family man to entrepreneur, you'll learn not just about the person, but his often tumultuous journey from his childhood to the legacy he left behind. You might even find a few valuable lessons you can apply to your life and business along the way. I'll then have the answer to our last Walt Disney World trivia question of the week, and I'll pose a new challenge for your chance to win a Disney prize package. Then stay tuned to the end of the show as I'll have some updates, your voicemails, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show.
Walt Disney once wrote, "In the lexicon of youth, there is no such word as fail."
They finally ended up buying this farm in Marceline, Missouri. I had two pals. One of them was Grandpa Taylor, who was a Civil War veteran. And another one was a retired doctor by the name of Doc Sherwood. My dad bought this Kansas City Star route. The Star route was quite a thing. They gave me a small route. I must have had 50 customers. I was about 9 or 10 when I started that. In winter, we'd go out at 3:30 in the morning right after a blizzard or in a blizzard or in pouring rain. It didn't matter. I did that for 6 years. It was tough. So I went to Kansas City, and Roy was in Kansas City working at a bank. So I went into this Kansas City Film Ad Company. So that was where I got started in the animation business. The first money that I made, I bought myself a motion picture camera called the Universal. There was no money coming in, so there was nothing left but to go into bankruptcy. I'd failed. But I learned a lot out of that. And I think it's important to have a good, hard failure when you're young, you know? It was a big day, the day I got on that California Limited and came to Hollywood. It was in July, I think, 1923. I was 21 going on 22.
Now, my brother Roy was already in Los Angeles. Both of us were unemployed. We solved the problem by going into business for ourselves. We established the first animated cartoon studio in Hollywood.
Well, after 40-some-odd years in the business, my greatest reward, I think, is that I've been able to build this wonderful organization. Also to have the public appreciate and accept what I've done all these years. That is a great reward. But all individuals are different. Some of us just wouldn't be satisfied with just carrying out a routine job and being happy. Yet I envy those people. I had a brother who I really envied because he was a mailman. But he was the one that had all the fun. He had himself a trailer, And he used to go off and go fishing, and he didn't worry about payrolls and stories and picture grosses or anything. And he was the happy one. I always said he's the smart Disney.
Walt Disney. That single name conjures up so many different thoughts and emotions in all of us. And hearing it, our mind's eye might be filled with animated imagery, visions of dark rides and theme parks, motion pictures, entrepreneurship, a true American fairy tale dream come true, and countless others. And the legacy that this man has left behind is unquantifiable, because legacy is more about sharing what you've learned than what you've earned, and bequeathing values over valuables, which I think Walt has done. And I think Walt continues to leave a positive, lasting contribution, not just to entertainment, but really humanity as a whole through what he struggled with, what he built, what he developed, and what he bequeathed to all of us. And our love of what he helped create has driven us all to want to know more about the man, the story behind the storyteller. And countless articles and books have been written, and documentaries and even full-length feature films have been released about Walt over the years. And I think for some of us, Walt has created more than just a desire to consume content and products, but to sometimes radically and positively alter our own life's course and direction to do the things that we feel not only that we want to do, but maybe are meant to do. And we take some of those lessons and examples and we weave our own stories based on his inspiration. And while we think that we may know many of the fascinating and wonderful and inspiring and maybe even sometimes difficult stories about Walt, there are countless others that we don't know. And that's why, since some of the very earliest episodes of WDW Radio, I've brought on guests to help share their stories of Walt, both personal and ones that they've learned, from Michael Broggie, who played in Walt's backyard and helped run the train before being served ice cream by Uncle Walt, to Marty Sklar and Richard Sherman and Julie Anders and so many others that worked for and with him. I've endeavored over the past 12 plus years and more than 500 episodes to learn not just about the parks, but the man himself, because it didn't really start with a mouse. It started with Walt. And that's why this week, with his birthday approaching on December 5th, I want to share more stories about the man with 10-ish things you never knew about Walt Disney. And joining me is someone who, like Walt, also has many stories we haven't heard and would love to in the future. He is a frequent guest on the show, a longtime friend, and author of nearly, he's going to correct me on this, 20 books about the Disney and Company, including his new book, Call Me Walt, Everything You Never Knew About Walt Disney, which you can get, by the way, by visiting www.radio.com/callmewalt. He is my friend, Mr. Jim Korkis.
Well, thank you, Lou. Thank you so much. It's great to have this opportunity, especially, as you say, with Walt's birthday around the corner, because everybody thinks they know Walt Disney, but if you take a look back at it, all of those, a lot of those biographies and documentaries, and basically you're defining Walt by what he did. So if you go to somebody and say Walt Disney, the first reaction is going to be, oh yeah, he created Mickey Mouse. He did the first Technicolor animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He did Disneyland. He did audio animatronics. All of those are things, and in fact, Walt himself created this Walt Disney brand, and so he even told Marty Sklar that one time in '65 that he's not Walt anymore. Walt Disney is this thing, and that when you see the name Walt Disney, it triggers these certain reactions. But Walt was a human being. He was a son. He was a brother, a father, a grandfather. And so a lot of things that he was and he did, we really don't know because we're so taken up with as you say, he transformed the world. He transformed animation from a novelty, which is what it was when he first got into doing animation. He changed it into an art form. He changed how we perceive outdoor entertainment, with Disneyland and boy, the ripples that have come from that. He changed how we looked at technology. He changed the whole hospitality industry. That whole concept of wearing name tags and having switchback queues and things like this. This is coming from a man who didn't even have 1 year worth of high school. He was this Midwest farm boy, who was self-educated, and my gosh, the impact that he had, we just don't know. And speaking of impact, I don't think you realize how big an impact this podcast has on people. I had an opportunity September 30th, October 1st to go out to Anaheim to speak at the Disneyana fan club event. In fact, they dressed me up as Merlin for a breakfast, and so I'm doing old Merlin gags and all of that. But for Merlin, they're new gags. But doing all of this and doing a book signing, and people coming up to me and they're going, yeah, I heard you on Lou's show. I really loved the show you guys did on parades. I can't believe it. You and I, we didn't realize it was sort of like, a lot of people have been asking to talk about parades. Yeah, we'll try and, put something together. And I think we were both surprised at how much information we could find, but that seemed to have a real impact. And then I came back, on that Monday, flew back in, to Orlando, and I was emceeing an event, for Bob Gurr, because Bob Gurr's now promoting. There's a DVD documentary out on Bob Gurr, and he's promoting that. And it's not a documentary about his life; it's about the documentary of how does Bob Gurr think. So how does he think? Coming up with this Autopia, or coming up with the King Kong, the original King Kong that was at Universal Studios Hollywood, and then the one that was out here at Florida, where it's grabbing, at the Skyway. And I was seated at a table with this young woman from Texas named Megan, who works for guest relations at Epcot out here. And she was going on and on about, the parade show and the Lou Mongello podcast. And I'm going, well, Lou's not that great. He puts on his pants 2 legs at a time, just like anybody else. But I took a look in her eyes, and they're just filled with this pixie dust. And that little light bulb moment was, this is what Lou's listeners are like. They're filled with this Disney pixie dust. They're filled with, I want to know these things. I love Disney, and I want to know as much as I can know. And here's someone who works at Disney, and Disney really isn't filling that hunger, that need. Some of it is there's just no time to do that, because it's a business. But the WDW Radio fills that need. It supplies that information that enriches the experience for these people, and now they can also pass this stuff along, because you and I both know, we've interviewed how many people who are just no longer with us anymore. And they left us with still so many stories they could tell. And so it's great that we have this opportunity today to talk about Walt and talk about him as a person, because he, especially in the last couple of years, he's certainly come under an awful lot of attack. But I think a lot of that attack is on that corporate Walt Disney brand or identity that he created, rather than who he really was as a person.
Right. It's the persona, not the person. And I think there's a huge difference. And look, Walt is someone I talk about a lot, not just on this show, which, look, a big reason why I love having you on is because you're not just an amazing storyteller and raconteur, but because we are very much cut from the same cloth of wanting to make people understand and appreciate and have a better experience. But I talk about Walt, the person, a lot when I give presentations to businesses or conferences or even at schools, because I think there are so many life and business lessons that we can learn from him and stories that we can share from Walt that we can take to heart and utilize in our daily lives, personally and professionally. So I think this is really going to be interesting. Again, we don't talk about these things ahead of time because I like being able to just have an open conversation with you about it.
Because neither of us have any time. Neither of us has any time to prepare. I think we would come across a lot more intelligent and clever if we had some time to. Well, you talk about this, and I'll talk about that.
No, I think this is better.
Let's phrase that this way.
I think because look, I want people. Since day one, Jim, I've always wanted people to feel like they're sitting at this table with us virtually, being part of this conversation where there isn't a lot really prepared, and we don't sort of script it out beforehand. So I want you to sort of go first and share with us, because especially, look, your book is coming out when? When does the book release?
Actually, the book is out there now, both paperback and on Kindle.
Just in time for the holidays.
Amazon.com, and I guess you have a link on your site as well. And so, again, I had the great privilege of knowing Diane Disney Miller, somebody who left us much too soon, and she created the Disney Family Museum in San Francisco because she felt that her dad was just becoming this thing. He was becoming something that you put on merchandise, rather than a real human being. And one of the things that was wonderful about Diane is she loved her father tremendously, but didn't think he was a saint. She knew that he could be hard on people and driven and all of that, but at the end of the day, Walt had significantly more hits than he had misses, and even though he was trapped in the era in which he grew up, everybody smoked. When Walt smoked, it wasn't like today. If you smoke, you're a pariah. But in those days, everybody smoked. So it's tough to go back now and condemn and say Walt should not have smoked. Walt shouldn't have.
Right.
But Rod Serling shouldn't have smoked either. John Wayne shouldn't have smoked. All of these people shouldn't have smoked. So it's not like you can't judge somebody who lived at that time by how society is now, because it's a lot different. So she realized that her dad wasn't perfect, and I've got to admit she was more familiar with her dad when he came home, and the time he spent at home, even as an adult, rather than what he was like at work. And so sometimes I would share stories with her, and she'd go, "I had never heard that." And I said, yeah, Diane, that's pretty common now. That's what was happening up at work. Because again, and you have too. How many times have you interviewed, children, and they had no clue. They had no clue what their dad was doing. When I was out in California, I got the chance to meet Wayne and Lucky Gracie, who were the two sons of Yale Gracie. And we got to sit and we got to talk, and it was that same experience. They told me all sorts of stories about Yale at home, that he was a tinkerer, and Lucky said, sometimes we would purposely break our toys because Dad would fix them. And when he fixed them so they were better. And that around the dinner table, he would do these little magic tricks. And one of the things that he left for them was this box of self-made magic tricks that he had, but there's no directions whatsoever. So they have no clue how any of these things work. And so the same thing with Diane. She saw her dad, at home. She saw, how he reacted to people in that. And so, I took, of course, extensive notes and all of this. And I just felt, there needs to be a book out there. There's plenty of Walt biographies. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and I've got dozens, and some are in foreign languages and all of that. And even the Disney company, starting in the 30s, would send out a biography about Walt Disney, to newspapers and magazines, and again, the focus was really on the things he did, and also the Horatio Algier story, the poor little boy who through hard work and imagination, became a movie studio producer, but there's so much more to Walt, and so again, the show is things you didn't know about Walt. Well, let me start off with one here. Okay, in the late '60s, Walt's plate was full, right? He was working on the film Mary Poppins. The additions to Disneyland's Tomorrowland, the opening of New Orleans Square, an entire new land, right? Plans for Mineral King, the Florida Project, the California Institute of the Arts, besides just the day-to-day, demands at the studio. So you would think, my gosh, this guy has time for nothing else, right? I certainly wouldn't. If I was... Yeah, he had plenty of time. He was a lawn bowler. In the late 60s, at his Palm Springs vacation home, Smoke Tree Ranch, he took up lawn bowling. Now, what lawn bowling is and it's sometimes called bowling on the green, you get these sort of grapefruit-sized balls, and they're called bowls, is what they're called. And on a flat rectangular grass landscape on a green here, you're tossing the ball, and the one who gets closest to the target ball, that's how you score a point. And the bowls are slightly lopsided, so they curve when you roll them. So it's a little challenging. So Walt wasn't very good at the sport. He really wasn't very good at any sport. He was really uncoordinated because as a kid, he'd get up in the morning to deliver papers and then go to school and then in the evening deliver. So he didn't have time to, play sports with his friends and all of that. So, he, and besides in Smoke Tree Ranch, he also bowled at the Roxbury Memorial Park, which was near his Holmby Hills home, on Carrollwood Drive there. And he was an early benefactor of the Beverly Hills Lawn Bowling Club. And after Walt passed, his Beverly Hills bowling buddies actually created an annual international tournament, I'll bet you didn't know this, in Walt's name that's continued for decades. And the award is this 4-foot-tall perpetual trophy made out of Brazilian redwood. And at the bottom, it has Walt's 4 personal bowling balls, lawn bowling balls. And it's topped by a foot-high Mickey Mouse gold statue. And the plaque has got a 3-dimensional image of Walt. and here we go, 1964, right? 1964. You got Mary Poppins. You got, the Florida Project. All of this. Walt participated in the United States Lawn Bowling Championships at Buck Hills Falls in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. He was doing this before he went to get that medal from President Johnson. Walt took his entire Beverly Hills team for a U.S. doubles tournament, and he was also talking to his team members that he was going to take them and their wives to the Australian lawn bowling tournament. And now Walt was kind of serious about this because he even had a bowling bag that was hand-tooled. So it's like those movies where you have pool sharks and all that, who have their own little case and all that. Walt had his own little bag there. And Diane told me that he found the idea of bowling tournaments silly, but he participated. He even designed the lawn bowling green. Walt himself, just like he designed Tom Sawyer Island, designed the lawn bowling green at Smoke Tree Ranch, which is there today. So there, how about that for something we never knew about Walt Disney? And so that story and more about lawn bowling, again, is in the book. And as I was researching the book, you come across some of this stuff and you go, holy cow, Walt was living, 8 or 10 lifestyles at the same time.
Right.
Where did this come from?
Well, and I think that's part of, one of the things I want to talk about later on is that there were many different aspects to Walt's life. You might have seen him as the studio head and the designer of this new concept of all these different things, but he was also somebody who, well, maybe I'll say it now, who cares? Because his family, I think, was so very important to Walt. He made sure his kids were of utmost importance, and to spend time, going to this club with his friends and his wife to do lawn bowling, which reminds me of playing bocce as a kid, the same kind of thing. And one of the quotes from Walt, which is one of my favorites, and I use in presentations all the time because I think it's so important and so under-recognized, represented, is Walt said a man should never neglect his family for business. And I'm sure that came from an internal mission that he wanted to keep, but probably some guilt because he wasn't able to do it as much as he wanted to. And it was important that family, should be your first business, to make sure that you spend enough time with them, even while you are trying to develop, a new motion picture, keep your company out of bankruptcy, whatever it is.
Well, you bring that up, and that's so important. Diane told me that he's running this studio, but every morning, without fail, he personally drove his daughters, Diane and Sharon, to school. And they went to different schools, because they're 3 years apart there in age. He personally drove them to school, and even when he became a grandfather, he would drive his grandchildren to school each morning. When he was babysitting them, at his house, or in the evening, though, he would have somebody from the studio go pick them up. But he personally. And what an impact that's got to make on a kid is that your dad is driving you to school. You're not getting on the school bus. You're not having the studio chauffeur take you there. And Diane said Walt showed up at every school event, whether it was a PTA meeting or it was a daddy-daughter dance or whatever. And she said, I was always telling him, no, Dad, it's really not that important. You don't need to come to that. He did. When Sharon was in a play, he was there. And Sharon didn't want him to come to the play because he had that cough. And she said, I didn't want him out there in that audience because I knew as soon as he started coughing, I'd get distracted. I wouldn't be paying attention to what I needed to do on stage. And it took a lot of family vacations. That final one up to British Columbia on the rented a boat so that everybody could go up there and take shore excursions and things like that. And it's like, look how much this guy all these things this guy is doing, and he's still taking time,
right?
To be with his family, to be with his wife, and he always made sure he was home every night by 7:30. And especially when the kids were younger, they all ate dinner together, so they could talk about the day. And Diane said, yes, Dad would talk about work, but he would always ask us about what our day was like, and he would listen. Now, also, Walt would go to bed by 9:30, so you're having dinner at 7:30. There's not a heck of a lot of time, but whatever time he has there, he's devoting to them. And there's a chapter in the book about Walt as a dad, and there's a chapter in the book about Walt as a grandfather, where he treated his grandchildren pretty much the same as he treated his two daughters there, And again, his feeling that, you don't give them rules, you try and teach them by example and hope that they will become intelligent and be able to make good choices on their own.
Right. And that's the thing. I think that's what he was making sure he was doing by taking his kids to work, by being present, not just physically, but present mentally at dinner, shows that, the lesson is you need to keep, things in business and life in perspective. And he said on more than one occasion, with all the successes that he had, the happiest moments in his life were the times that he spent with his kids and his grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
Family was his first business. They were always part of his dream, always part of his vision, always within his focus. So he was never so busy that, the family, fell to the side, whether it was his kids, his grandkids, his wife, who I think was probably the only person who could ever say no and get away with it.
Well, I think Roy sometimes. Well, I sometimes Roy couldn't get away with saying no, but yeah, I think Lillian that was the case. What's interesting to me too is that those were two separate worlds: his work life and his home life. And so even people who knew him at the studio, like Ward Kimball and all that, Ward was telling me, Walt's private life is pretty gray because nobody knows anything about it. He doesn't, he comes in and he talks about how proud he is about his daughters and things like that. He says, but we have no clue what he does once he leaves the studio. And the same thing is Walt, kept his family pretty clueless about what was going on at work.
Right.
When he came home, that was the life.
Right. And I think
Diane said, it was like having a playmate come home every night. We'd run and hug him. A couple of the grandkids said that as well. Two of the grandkids told me that when they would watch the weekly TV show and Walt would come on and they were really, really young, they would crawl to the TV and kiss the image on the TV. Because the image on the TV was pretty much the image that they saw as well. But again, I have people ask me all the time, well, was the Disney family involved with the studio and after Walt? No, not really. It was two separate worlds there, and Walt didn't, train or prepare his family to take over the work. That was something else.
And I think, look, and obviously it was a different time back then, and there's different distractions and things that we have now. But I think, there's an important takeaway there, not to sort of start, waxing poetic, but, as busy as we say we are, I don't have time for this. Look, if Walt could make time and find time for his family, like we can too, however busy we are with some of the other things in business and life that are sometimes distracting to us.
I think we always think, well, there'll be plenty of time for that. Right. Yeah, there'll be. I really got. I see that. actually, I see that with my own brother who was working at Disney. He just recently retired, and he was in a major executive position, and he really had to have a wake-up call because Disney can absorb all of your time because there are fire drills happening every single moment, you know. We needed this last Monday, you know. We need you to come in this weekend and get this done and all of that. And if you're not careful, Disney will absorb all of that time. And in Mike's case, he was not having enough time spending with his son growing up. But he had one of those revelation moments, and so he started to readjust his life because something happened, and he realized, oh my gosh, I'm missing these things, and it's not like I can go back and see that first baseball game. I can't go back and re-experience, you know, this thing that he's going through. It's happening constantly. Well, you must run into that yourself. You're a father of two children, and my gosh, look at all the things that you're juggling. You know, the mighty Mongello Entertainment Enterprise here, and not only that, but all of that extended family you have of listeners who are constantly writing to you or phoning you or meeting you in the parks and all of that. You know, you must find it challenging to try and create that balance so that there's time for your immediate family.
Well, you know, it's funny because when I was practicing law, and I tell my kids this all the time, look, I'm with my kids every morning, you know, having breakfast before they go to school. I pick them up every day from school.
Mm-hmm.
I eat dinner with them every single night, you know, barring exigent circumstances. And I said, look, if I was still practicing law in New Jersey, you probably wouldn't see me, you know, the way you see me now. And they might like that, but you probably wouldn't see me as much or as often. But it was more important for me to be present with them and to not miss any of those moments. And, you know, we've all... You know, we embrace the extended family. You know, my extended family is very much an extension of my immediate family. And, you know, the lifestyle that we lead, we are very fortunate and very blessed to have. And, you know, it's one of the things that, you know, I think hopefully like Walt, my kids are learning from the lessons I am trying to impart to them, which is you can do anything you want. You can find that thing you love and turn it into what you do. And you can make sure you spend every moment that you can with your family, and chain your daughter to the radiator so she never leaves the house because you don't want her to grow.
You can do most things that you want. I don't picture you being an NBA player.
You know,
I don't picture you out there on the basketball court opposite LeBron.
No, but you know what, Jim? If I had a passion for basketball and I wanted to share that passion, I would find a way to do it. I would make a podcast. I would do videos. I would do something because that's the day and age that we live in now. You know, we have the ability to be producers and not to sort of go off on a tangent, but you know, as I was thinking about this earlier today, I'm like, man, could you imagine Walt Disney and I'm going to segue this into one of the things I wanted to talk about. Could you imagine Walt Disney growing up in 2017 with the technology and the resources and the information available to him, right? Because I think one of the things...
Right, well, especially with his natural curiosity about new technology. And more importantly, how to humanize that technology. You know, the audio animatronics technology for the tiki birds, you know, somebody else might have been able to come up with. That was technology that the U.S. military was using on rockets that were being shot up in the air. That's how the different stages were dropping off. Is you sent off a sound pulse that, you know, opened the clip so that stage would drop off. Well, Walt saw, oh, look, it's closed, and you send sound, and then it opens, and then you kill the sound, and it closes. That's like the beak on a bird, you know? My gosh.
Right. Right.
You know, and so now we see the Tiki Room, and I still love the Tiki Room. I still love the original Tiki Room, and yet this is technology that was meant, you know, for rocket ships. So yes, if Walt was growing up with new technology today, he'd be humanizing it, and he'd be able to look at it in different perspectives.
Well,
Don't blow my mind so early in the podcast. We've still got halfway of the podcast here to go here.
Well, and I think,
but yes, you're absolutely right. You know, and again, you know, even if Walt had not gone into animation, which was his passion, even as a kid, was the cartoons, because he got recognition. More importantly, he was able to make people laugh. You know, he liked that. If he had grown up to be a supermarket owner, imagine what supermarkets today would have looked like, you know?
But I think that's it. I think, look, I always believe, Jim, as somebody who had a radical career change relatively late in my life, going from attorney in New Jersey to whatever this thing is that I do, unlike my journey is very
redeeming yourself, right? Redeeming yourself from a life of sin. There,
I think one thing people might not realize is that Walt found his calling, I think, at a very, very young age. And when I say young, I don't mean in his 20s. I mean when he was like 5 years old.
No, wait, 10, 11 years old.
Well, I would even go back.
He was laser focused. This is what and again, the insane thing is he's laser focused on this. And there really isn't a career. You know, when Walt started being interested in doing cartoons, comic strips, let alone comic books and all this, comic strips hadn't really, taken off or had become a firm thing. If you were going to be a cartoonist, you would have been an editorial cartoonist for a newspaper, and all of those jobs were already taken by guys who had been there for years and years, and you were not going to get that job unless they kicked off, and the 100 other people who wanted that job, weren't there. And so for him to think at a young age, this is what I'm going to do, and this is only what I want to do, again, it's absolutely incredible. But as you were saying, he was so focused on that everything he was doing, every other thing he was doing, was helping support so he could get towards that dream that he wanted to accomplish. And yes, that's open to people today. Listen, I have friends in their late 20s, and they still have no clue what they want to do with the rest of their life.
But I think it's fascinating that for Walt, this again, I sort of call, I refer to it as his calling.
It's a passion. It was a calling. But
it comes, and it's almost a moment that you can refer to as the genesis or the catalyst. So he's 5 years old, and one of his neighbors by the name of Doc Sherwood is the very first person to ever pay Walt Disney for a drawing, and that was of Doc's horse, Rupert. And if you remember back at the old Walt Disney Story on Main Street, USA. So I'll put the Wayback Machine to like April, May-ish, 1973. I remember this, and I looked up a copy of the script, and he talked about these two friends that he had. And one of them was Grandpa Taylor, who would talk about all of his Civil War stories. And the other one was this retired doctor named Doc Sherwood, who had this horse named Rupert. And the doc would have him go over, and he brought his crayons that his aunt brought him, and I'll get to her in a little bit, and brought his crayons and his big chief tablet to draw pictures of Rupert for him, and he would give him, a nickel or dime or something like that. And you think that maybe for Walt may have been, you try and point to a moment. And I think, the other thing too, Jim, and as I was thinking about this and Walt's early childhood, and something that maybe not everybody is as familiar with is, Walt's childhood was not easy at all. And I think there's a takeaway here too, which is, look, it doesn't matter where you start. Sometimes that rough childhood or rough beginning or a rough go at business could make you who you become. when the farm failed and Walt's up at 3:30 in the morning and he's on this paper route, and he's got this sort of very Dickensian boyhood, and I think that helped grow his vision or this of an escape to a utopian world that he wanted to put down on paper and then on celluloid and then in 3-dimension. Those things and the things that he encountered as a kid really, including the hard times, inspired his animations and the theme parks and all the things that came to him later in life.
Well, I think basically what Walt was learning there as a kid is no matter how hard it is, it's not going to kill you. You can survive. You can move on. You don't need to give up. And yes, his parents never bought him any toys. Sometimes his older brother Roy would set aside a couple of extra pennies or whatever, and sometimes buy Walt or his younger sister Ruth, like a top or something, something very inexpensive and simple. But he didn't have any toys as a kid. It always had to be practical. His father wouldn't allow them to butter the toast at breakfast because you could take that butter and you could go sell it to the neighbors. And so his mother would sometimes butter the toast underneath when she gave it to Walt and Roy so they could have, just a little taste of that. And it was hard work, on the farm. Now, Walt was very young, so there was not a lot of things he could do on the farm, but there was still enough, and you have to milk those cows every morning. You can't just say, oh, well, it's the weekend, I'm not going to get up and milk the cows. Cows get very irritated. You get discontented milk if you don't do those things, and you have to do that at the crack of dawn. But you were talking about Sherwood. I think one of the things that helped Walt is he had an awful lot of angels in his life, not just Sherwood, but you were mentioning his Aunt Margaret, who would buy him these very cheap pads of paper. Maybe there are people in your listening audience who can remember, because these lasted through the 50s and the 60s. They were such cheap pulp paper that you could actually see little bits of wood, in the paper, because it was you wouldn't pay to refine the paper to get to that. She supplied him, with that. Bert Hudson, who ran a barber shop, he would post up Walt's cartoons on the windows and give Walt a free haircut. And if Walt didn't need a free haircut, he'd give him a dime or something, for this. This is again, this stuff is in the book there, but basically there were angels who were helping him along for his dream, and I think a lot of us are not paying attention to the angels in our life. And where I'm heading with this is I've always found you one of the angels in my life that have constantly supported my research and my writing and to try and get it out to other people. And so no matter how tough things can be, there are angels out there who are helping you along, but you've got to do a lot of that work yourself. And Walt did, Walt did. Walt it took some art classes on the weekends and things like that. It wasn't like, because I see kids today, they wake up in the morning and they go, oh, I see those people on Nickelodeon and Disney Channel. I could do that. No, there's a lot more that goes into that, and it's not just learning the lines, there's an understanding of the character. There's learning about timing. There's learning, even something as simple as hitting your marks, but I see a lot of, especially kids today, who, if it's tough, well, I'll just give up. I'll go on to something else. And Walt never did. This is what I'm going to do, and no matter how many stumbling blocks are there, I'm going to, go ahead and do that. Diane told me that Walt was so excited to be in art class that if he had to go to the bathroom, he trained himself to hold it until the break, because he didn't want to miss 1 second of what was being taught, what was being shown.
And just quickly going back to Aunt Margaret, who I think is sort of a lost Disney, for lack of a better word. And there's another one I want to talk about too. I think she's very important, and I love the term angel, and you almost made me cry when you were talking about that. So thank you. But didn't one of the reasons why she brought him the crayons and stuff was because didn't Walt draw on the side of the house or the barn with tar? Right, he was using tar on the house.
Basically, Elias had used some tar to seal some barrels. Because they were going to catch rainwater, things like that. And Elias and Flora, Walt's mom and dad, left, and Walt was also very mischievous. And so what he did is he took a stick and he dipped it into the tar, and on the side of the wall, the white wall that was facing the road, of all things, he was drawing these houses and little chimneys with squiggles coming out. And then he convinced his younger sister, Ruth, to take a stick and, draw some zigzags. And he says, oh, yeah, we'll wipe this off before, Mom and Dad get home. And, of course, they didn't realize that tar is different than paint or anything else. And once it dries, it hardens. And it's there, And I think that Walt got Ruth involved because he wouldn't be the only one in trouble, for that to happen. But his dad, of course, blew up, and then his dad left it there forever so that Walt could learn that lesson by seeing, look what you've done, to the house. And Kay Mallins, who got the house. She does the Walt Disney Hometown Museum up there in Marceline. They said they've tried to pull off, the layers of paint to see if they could find, the images of that tar still underneath there, and they've been unable to do that. The sad story about Aunt Margaret, that again a lot of people don't know, is Walt said, she was always praising what I was doing. He said, I look back at it now and I realized, how lame that he didn't use the word lame, but that it wasn't really strong, but she was always giving him that praise and support. And so when he became successful with Mickey Mouse, one of the first things he did was he went over, she was married to Uncle Robert, is he went over to the house to show her some new drawings for I think it was for Snow White that was being done, and unfortunately Margaret had by that time gotten Alzheimer's. So he said that just drained the joy out of my body that this woman who had always supported me, when I finally could show her, that her support had led to, me being successful here, and she just couldn't understand it. So, and as Walt says, with every laugh, there's got to be a tear, and that's a story that always brings a little tear to me, because it brought one to Walt. Walt wanted to say, look, I want to show you, this is because of you. You were constantly encouraging me to draw. And again, Walt drew until, the end of his life. I even talked with Disney animators who go, oh, well, Walt probably couldn't even draw the tail on Mickey Mouse. Walt, if you take a look at the existing artwork of Walt could draw, and Walt could draw very well, but he very quickly realized there are people who can draw a lot better than I can. Right. And my strengths lie with storytelling. His grandchildren, one of them told me that one of the things that Grandpa always liked to do was he would give them this red grease pencil that Walt always liked to use to correct on scripts, and have them close their eyes and just draw a squiggle on a piece of paper, and then Walt would come in and transform it into an animal or a machine or, things like that. But again, that's one of the misconceptions we have out there. Oh, well, Walt really couldn't draw. Yes, he could, and he could actually draw very well. He sketched out the outline for Tom Sawyer's Island, for crying out loud. He drew a rough copy of how he wanted Epcot to be designed, and again, the background he had as an artist allowed him to communicate to other artists. Peter Ellenshaw, the great matte artist for Disney, it said that Walt was the only person he knew who really wasn't an artist, but could talk like an artist and help you to understand, what he wanted you to do visually. So, and again, just another one of the things that, we take for granted. Sometimes if people say something over and over and over, we go, oh, well, that must be true because everybody's saying that. It's not. Hey, let me give you another thing you never knew about Walt Disney. As I said, he was home every night at 7:30. And, of course, when Diane and Sharon were living there, they would eat dinner together. But once, Sharon and Diane got married, they moved out, it was just Walt and Lillian. And so he'd come home and he'd eat with Lillian, but they'd eat on TV trays in front of the TV. And Lillian said what drove her crazy is if there was a lousy program that came on, she goes, well, I'll just change that. And Walt goes, no. I want to study that. I want to see what they got wrong so I can do that. Now, here's something, and again, this is in the book, so you don't have to constantly replay the podcast to get this information. What were the two game shows that Walt and Lillian loved to watch?
Match Game.
Do you have any clue?
Match Game 73 and America's Got Talent.
No, in the 50s and 60s, they loved watching Groucho Marx on You Bet Your Life. And it made Walt laugh. And the other quiz show, and this is a quiz show I was completely unfamiliar with, but I have a direct quote from Lillian that this was a show that they liked to watch, was one that was called Two for the Money by a comic called Herb Schreiner. And I am completely unfamiliar with the show and with the comic, but I do know, those. And again, you've got listeners who are probably listening right now and are Googling that, right. and the box people are going to say, well, Jim didn't know what this show was. This show was the da 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 da. So again, we're so involved with all these other things that Walt did that we don't pay attention to. Look, he was a person. He was, as Peter Ellenshaw told me. He says it was just amazing. Walt was just such an ordinary person, but he was so extraordinary, and we couldn't understand that. He went around the world. He knew all of these things, and yet he was so unsophisticated in so many ways.
All right, so here's a trivia question from your trivia question. And I want to be careful how I ask it so I don't give it away too easily. Which one of Walt's friends appeared on You Bet Your Life?
Ooh, great trivia question. And I've got that on videotape, too.
Of course you do.
I think they even run it on YouTube.
I don't know if I've ever seen that. I've seen a screen capture of it, and the answer is?
Ward Kimball.
Ward Kimball. There you go. Of course Jim
Ward Kimball. And I'll bet Walt watched the episode where Ward was on that. And yeah, you see Groucho going, if you haven't seen that clip, I've got to bring that clip over and show it to you. It's very funny. It's about 10, 15 minutes long, and Ward is teamed up with this average housewife who is looking at Ward as if this man is insane.
Which he may,
and
which he
one
very
of the
well,
questions that Groucho Marx asks is, after he had talked with Ward and made fun of, Ward's backyard train and all that. One of the questions,
are you a duck?
The truth. One of the questions is, name the cricket in Pinocchio. and Groucho Marx looks at Ward and goes, "You dirty dog," because Ward, of course, is the one who designed and animated Jiminy Cricket. But you watch this show too, and you realize how little money these people were making. I guess we're used to the fact of, yes, you're going to win $10,000, you're going to win $100,000, you're going to win $1 million. For this is just chump change back in those days. But I guess that was also a lot of money in those days.
Yeah.
We don't realize that now, that a dime used to buy you a comic book or a candy bar or two candy bars, or a dime is what you would use to make a phone call.
All right, so I'm gonna throw another a little thing you might not have known about Walt Disney, which is actually I'm gonna sneak two into one because they're sort of tied in together.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna use one to get.
Look, you don't have to explain this. It's your show. You can do anything you want.
All right, so
in the middle of the show, you could talk about somebody besides Walt Disney because it's your show. You can
like
do
Ward
what
Kimball,
you want. Okay.
You Bet Your Life. All right, so when Walt first came to Hollywood,
yes,
part of the reason why he was coming was to visit his brother Roy, who was in the hospital with tuberculosis.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people realize that Roy was he was sick. He was very sick. He was in the Navy for just a couple of years. And then when he was discharged, I guess he was a banker in L.A. And when Walt left Kansas City after, obviously Laugh-O-Gram didn't do as well as expected, and he moved to Hollywood, he wanted to come to direct, maybe even act, but his brother Roy was in the hospital. And when Walt had a tough time finding work, Roy's like, look, man, you've got to go back to doing what you do best. You need to go back to drawing cartoons and things like that. And he went to the different studios and had a tough time finding a job. And then he was trying to sell some of the Alice stuff to distributors in New York, and that eventually, continues that way. And Walt ends up going back to the hospital and talking to his brother Roy about the offer from Margaret Winkler and the details, and really starts to push Roy into going into business together. And Roy, being Roy, was not so sure that they'd be able to do it. He also knew that because he was sick, he wouldn't necessarily be able to go to do an office job. But Walt's like, look, man, you need, as much as I need to go and do cartoons, you need to get out of hospital and come and join me. But the connection that I was going with here is that when he first gets to California, again, I think this is one of the unknown or unheralded Disneys that I don't think gets enough credit or recognition. And maybe Walt's story is very different had it not been for him. Is not necessarily Aunt Margaret, but it's Uncle Robert, who, look, early on he persuades Elias to move to Marceline after, things in Chicago are not going the way he likes. He's not thrilled with life in the big city and maybe the impact that it's having on his kids. But when he goes out to California, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, didn't Walt stay with Robert for a little while, and then eventually he was borrowing small amounts of money from him?
In fact, Robert was a big investment entrepreneur, but he was also a real hard-nosed. So his nephew is coming out here. His nephew obviously broke, having a hard time, whatever. And so Robert charges him $5 a month rent to stay there, and mostly that was paid by Roy. But also, then Walt says, I want a place, to start a studio and do some animation. So Robert charged him an additional $1 a month to use the garage next door for that. And in fact, it was also Robert who came up with money to fund the first Disney Brothers studio. And Roy knew, that he was such a hard case that the very first debtor they paid back in full immediately was Uncle Robert. And
right?
And in fact, after Walt left Uncle Robert's along with Roy, they actually rented a room much cheaper at the house right across the street from Robert. And Robert's dog, Peggy, is the one that pops up, a German Shepherd, pops up in the Alice comedies there. And if you are interested in Walt's family, in Call Me Walt, one of the things I do is I have individual chapters devoted to each of the Disney family members, Roy and Raymond and Herbert and Ruth and Flora and Elias. And so Roy actually graduated from Manual Training High School in Kansas City in 1912, and then he worked as a bank clerk at the First National Bank of Kansas City. And Roy once said that if it weren't for Walt, he probably would have ended up being a bank manager for the rest of his life. And in World War II, Roy was served in the Navy from 1917 to 1919. He was a petty officer on a ship in the Atlantic that was assigned to transport material from New York to France and to protect convoy ships. And Roy actually saw Allied ships being blown up. And I talked with his son, Roy E., and he said, I tried to talk to Dad about, his experiences during the war and all that. He just didn't want to talk about that. Roy was honorably discharged, but because of his time on the ship, he developed tuberculosis, and he was actually moved to like 3 different, or at least 2 different facilities before he ended up in Los Angeles. And he ended up in Los Angeles because it was a drier atmosphere. And so if you were suffering from tuberculosis, that's, that would help, with that. And you're right. Walt went to him and he says, look, I got this contract from Margaret Winkler. You got to sign yourself out of the, the Veterans Hospital here in Los Angeles. And so Roy did. He got up and he signed himself out, and that was it. And he never had a recurrence of TB. Although in the early years when they were had the Disney Brothers studio on Kingswell, they're the very first one where they're doing the Alice comedies. Sometimes Roy would get so weak that he would have to leave sometimes in the afternoon to go home and rest for a bit because he still had some of those after effects. And my gosh, I was talking about angels in your life. If it hadn't have been for Roy Disney said he would have ended up as a bank manager. If it hadn't been for Roy Disney, Walt might have just ended up being, just one of those nameless animators that worked for a small animation studio, rather than, running his own company there. And Roy always had his back. Roy didn't always agree, and they would get into huge arguments that Walt referred to as screamers, and sometimes they wouldn't talk to each other for weeks or months. They would only talk through intermediaries. And Edna, Roy's wife, and I quote her in the book there, she said, often Lillian and I would sit and we would talk about the what we called the Disney disposition, which was that terrible temper that was just like their father had, that would just, take no prisoners. It's just like an atomic bomb going off.
Listen, as much as I would like to have sat at dinner and listened to conversations between Walt and Roy, man, I would have loved to hear conversations between Lillian and Edna, because that's when the real good stuff would have come out.
Well, and again, you talk about that time period. These are wives who, our husbands are good men. They don't have a straying eye. They're not, there was never any indication that Walt was, interested in other women in any way. He had a wife. That was it. And Roy the same. You have these solid, and they're bringing home the money, and they're, and they're good fathers and all that. So, so if they have these little eccentricities, you put up with that. Roy took up the hobby of gardening because he wanted a hobby where he would be there at home. He wouldn't be away doing something else. He did do polo for a little bit, but I think he did that because Walt was doing that, and he just wanted to sort of keep an eye on Walt. But he got out of polo way before Walt did. He convinced Walt to get out of that because it was just too dangerous, but not in time for Walt to have that polo accident where he got hit by that ball. And instead of going to a doctor, he went to a chiropractor. And so what happened is, over the years, a calcium deposit developed, in the back of Walt's neck there. And it got so bad, in the 60s, that the pain would just radiate down his back and down his leg, and sometimes to the point where he had to drag his leg. So that's where some of the thing comes from that I talk about. Oh, well, Walt was drunk because he often was stumbling. No, it was because of the pain in his leg. And when they went on that British Columbia cruise, it was his son-in-law Ron. It was telling me Walt sometimes had to grab his pants and lift his leg up in order to get into a boat. That's why he finally agreed to go in and, I've got to get surgery because, Walt referred to himself as gimpy because, it would sometimes happen and this would go on. See, I can't be on a podcast with you. We talk about one thing and we go off into all of these tangents in the woods and all of this. And these people at home are going, what are these guys talking about? What is this?
All right, so bring us back around. Give me something else that people probably don't know about Walt.
Walt was a Boy Scout. In 1914, Walt went to the Congregational Church. Walt was about 12 years old or so at the time, and the Sunday school classes there formed a Boy Scout troop, and he really wasn't in very long. He only reached tenderfoot level, but he maintained a great respect for Boy Scouts throughout his life. I think some people know he received the Silver Buffalo Award from the Boy Scouts in 1946, which is, a very, very prestigious, like one of the top honors you can give. But something that people don't know is Walt sponsored a Boy Scout troop at the Disney Studios, and they met on Monday nights, and Walt would sometimes go and attend. So yes, I'm a strong proponent of, get the Bob Thomas book, Walt Disney, an American Original. That's not in there. It's not in the Neil Gabler book or all, because Walt did so many things, for crying out loud. How are you going to slip in one paragraph of, Walt used to be a Boy Scout, and in fact he sponsored a Boy Scout troop. Holy cow! But that's in my book. So again, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is so that this information will be out there and available. And again, the book's not a biography, it's not chronological, and it's definitely not definitive. In fact, I'm sitting here looking at the floor on some of my notes of things that I just didn't have room for in the book. So if this book sells, we get a sequel with more Walt stories. If it doesn't, at least I've got that book out. Oh, here. I'm just going to take your time and tell another story, because this is a story that Floyd Norman told me. And for those of you who don't know Floyd Norman, he was the first black animator at the Disney Studios. He was personally hired by Walt, and Walt personally promoted him to Storyman on Jungle Book. And Storyman was about the highest status you could have at the Disney Studio in those days. Storyman was more important than director, for that to go on. And of course, Floyd wrote the foreword for my book. So thank you, Floyd. Floyd's a good friend. And when I was out in California as Merlin, pulled Floyd up on stage, and so Merlin interviewed Floyd. So yes, I'm doing my, yes. And you were, because Floyd was Milt Kahl's assistant. Milt Kahl animated Merlin and Madame Mim, so we got some great stories from him. But here's a great story, because again we get. I just ran into that this week with someone who goes, no, Walt was racist. Walt was, and I go, no. I said, there were people who were racist who worked at the Disney Studios. In fact, Floyd told me he was up for a position in layout, and he didn't get it because the head of the layout department felt uncomfortable working with a person of color. He says, but Walt never knew any of that. And he says, I ended up being a storyman. It was so much better. But Floyd told me he never personally heard any racist behavior or words from Walt, and certainly not when Floyd was in the room pitching story stuff and all of that. But here's something he told me that I didn't know, and now you guys will know. In the 50s and 60s, there was a black janitor at the studio. His name was Claude Wilson. Okay, and a janitor, is pretty much invisible, because people never pay much attention. The janitor comes in, he's emptying the trash cans, whatever. And so a janitor actually overhears a lot of uncensored conversations and all that, as he's cleaning up. He never heard Walt being racist, well, here's Walt on stage. Of course he's not going to say anything. Well, here in his private thing, he never heard anybody who worked with Walt calling Walt racist. Now, Claude Wilson, boy, I wish I had known he even existed, and I'm sure he's no longer around. But he also moonlighted as a bartender at Walt's parties at the Carolwood home. And so even in those days, Claude was up there in years, and Floyd told me, this guy ran the bar, and he always spoke well of Walt, and he loved working for him. And he said that Walt always treated him, as an equal, always treated him, no condescension or, well, even in like, well, you're a bartender, dude. It's like, no, he's another human being. And Floyd said, we talked about this stuff privately. So if there had been anything at all about racism, this old gentleman, would have made his feelings known to me just to warn me, you got to be careful, right. Because this is going to come back and, because especially in those days, especially in the 50s and the early 60s, quite a different time and quite a different reaction to people who were African American. But the whole point was, no. You could be any color, you could be any sex, you could be any age, you could be any religion. All that Walt cared for was, can you do the job? And so during World War II, there was actually a female Japanese artist working there. And Walt came in, and this is an interview she gave, and she said, Walt was very concerned. He says, when people come in to ask you, who you are, what do you say? And she said, oh, don't worry, Mr. Disney. I tell them I'm part Korean and part Chinese and part Hawaiian and part Japanese. And Walt looked at me and he says, you don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. When people ask you, you just tell them, I am an American. It's none of their business who you are. She said, but he worried about me. He worried about the other Japanese artists, if we were being harassed or threatened or things like this, and so my gosh, and again, Walt's very much a person of his time, but to me, he's constantly doing these type of things that sort of, elevates him, a little bit more. It's like, holy cow, holy cow, here's a guy, and again, he grew up in the Midwest, so it's not like he had, growing up, it's not like he had a lot of interaction with people from different countries or colors or whatever, and yet everybody's the same. A person is a person, and he loved talking to kids. He loved his wife Lillian said he loved talking to old people. He loved talking to old people about their lives and what their life was like, and all of that, because he felt he could learn so much from that.
I think I'm with Walt, man. I'm the same way. I love talking to older people, although I'm becoming an older person, so people can want to talk to me. But
you talk to me all the time,
But it's true because you want to learn from their experiences. It's one thing to see a fictionalized representation or read something, but to hear a story from someone, if you have parents or grandparents who are getting up in age, like I know I sound like a crazy old man, but like sit down with them and just let them tell you stories. Stories about I loved hearing my dad tell stories. And again, sometimes you have to push them to do that. And when I first went out and did interviews with animators who were getting on in years in those days, they loved telling those stories. They loved having somebody listen to that because again, not only did that validate their life, but it brought back that moment in time for them. So okay. Speaking of tangents, sit back, relax, because here's a tangent. You want to do some good in this world and get a rewarding experience for yourself. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I've done it in the past when I've had relatives.
Send $1 to WDW.
to Jim Corcus.
No, go ahead.
But if you have a relative who may be in assisted living or a nursing home, or even if you don't, like, it doesn't cost you anything other than a little while of your time to go there. So my wife's grandmother, when she was in her very, very late 90s, spent some time in a assisted living home, and we would go there all the time to see her and visit with her. And I used to love not just chatting with her, but I would chat with some of the other people who were there, who were just, one, so happy to have somebody to talk to. I'm getting choked up. They were so happy to have somebody to talk to, but the stories that they would share and the excitement in their eyes, you don't know the benefit that you give to those people by just sitting there and listening with, some bit of attention.
And one of the things you'll find, or at least that I have found, is that when they're talking about their younger days, they are sharp.
Yeah.
They are clear.
But you can also, there's also lessons you can glean from it. And I don't mean to sort of make this sound like an entrepreneur, but, ask them what are the things in their lives that, were most profound. What are the things that they regret doing or not doing the most? Because you don't want to, I think that you never want to get to that point where you live with regrets, right? That's why I am where I am, because I never wanted to live with those regrets. So that, I mean, again, way off tangent.
Well, it really isn't, because we're learning that, about Walt's life. As you said, it doesn't make any difference where you start, but also that you need to be true. You need to be authentic. Don't take advantage of other people, even when you've got the opportunity to do so. You know, how many other people rose to success? You know, like a Rockefeller or whatever, but they did it by stepping over other people, and then at the end of their life, they have these regrets of, you know, I was so, you know, focused on getting where I wanted to be that, you know, it didn't make any difference, the collateral damage of people along the way. That never happened to Walt. You know, even in the 60s when people who knew him in Marceline or knew him in Kansas City would write to him, Walt would write back a nice, friendly letter, you know, of this. I interviewed Virginia Davis, who was the first Alice in the Alice comedies, and she said about 8 or 10 years after I had done the Alice comedies, I was looking for some work and all of that, and I wrote back. I wrote to Walt Disney, and she said the letter I got back from him, the first line was, "How nice of you to remember me." and she ended up working in ink and paint, but she says, try and imagine any other, you know, CEO doing that. Right. You know, this is Walt Disney, and when I was writing to him, you know, he was at the peak of his fame with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all of that. And the first thing he goes is, "Oh, well, how nice of you to remember me," you know, as opposed to, "Yes, what is it you want?" And, you know, right. Who are you? And, you know, whatever, you know, you can be a success and still be nice. The very first, and I love that story because, again, it humanizes them so very much. And I'll just I'll pen that with a quick story of my own. The first time that I ever interviewed Richard Sherman, who is still to this day one of my favorite personal opportunities to have ever gotten to meet and speak with and become friends with. But the first time I had reached out to him, and I spoke with his wife first on the phone for a long period of time, and then we were chatting, and this was before D23, and a lot of these legends really started to come more to the forefront in terms of doing interviews and being on stage and things like that. And also establishing sort of a set soundbite story.
Exactly. And he said, "Are you sure? Why?" He goes, "Are you sure? Why do you want to interview me?" And I think I said, "Don't you know who you are?" You know, but there's that humility that I think that they all had, which makes them so endearing. I think, you know, Walt was probably like, "Richard, like, you just want to hug him. He's like your granddad." Like, they're just, you know, genuinely nice, humble person. So I love hearing that story. And actually, so I'll just punctuate that with one other quick story, because we could do this all night, as if we haven't been doing it all night anyway. So when you talked about getting letters back.
Well, see, the way I look at it, it's like, you and I are always having these types of conversations. We even talked before the podcast, you know, started. And what happens is just every now and then you remember to press the button to record.
What did I say to you? I said we should have recorded.
Listen in on some of it.
We should have almost recorded the pre-show to a certain degree. But when you were talking about getting the letters from Walt, that made me think about something, because I get this question a lot, Jim. I'm sure you do too. I hear this all the time, which is, I found this thing my aunt has. This was in my grandmother's attic, and it comes to the Walt Disney signature. And what I think a lot of people might not know is the Walt Disney signature, and I'm using air quotes as if you could see me, that you see in the official corporate logo is not actually Walt Disney's signature.
It's based on his signature.
Right. It's a very much stylized version, but there's been lots of different sort of quote-unquote versions of his signature over the years, and I tell this people a lot when they're looking for an appraisal or a value on something. You know, the Walt Disney logo is not his real signature. That logo actually didn't come about until like 2 decades after Walt had passed, but there were a lot of other people who were authorized,
who were approved by Walt.
Right, and so some of them were legal and some of them were just sort of approved. So like Hank Porter had the ability to sign Walt's name. There were also secretarial
Floyd
signatures.
Godfreyson did it.
Right? Didn't
too.
Bob Moore did a lot of them in the 50s? So there's a lot of versions. You might have a signature of Walt, but it was one of Walt's signatures that was authorized by the studios that was really done by one of his secretaries, because it sort of followed that
because
look.
They're constantly getting requests,
Right.
Send me a piece of autographed artwork, send me, or even just send me Walt's autograph,
Right.
And so they had little postcards with a Walt portrait. And so, it could be done very quickly, because Walt was a busy guy. He was out lawn bowling.
And you can look and see, some of, before Walt was, when Walt was the person before the persona, his signatures were very sort of blockish and not so almost whimsical. And so it did sort of evolve over time.
Well, also your signature changes over time.
Sure.
I take a look at my signature now. It's much different than it was, a couple of years ago, and certainly back from when I was in college and all of that, and was trying to practice my signature.
Right.
What's going to be, should the K go down this way?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what that should look, what it should look like on paper. And when I was practicing law and I was signing my name 200 times a day, Louis A. Mongello got very short and very sloppy very quickly. So,
well, you see that when you see these signatures, autographed photos being auctioned off on eBay and all of that, and it's like, here's William Shatner's signature, and you look, and you can't find a W or an S in there anywhere, So
yeah. And sometimes your certificate of authenticity, it's authentic that I signed William Shatner's name, but you have no...
Well, as Mark Evanier once told me, because he's often... he worked for Jack Kirby, so he's often called in to authenticate, is this actual Jack Kirby artwork? Is this Jack Kirby's signature and all of this? And he says... And people will come and say, well, look, there's this certificate of authenticity. And Mark says, does it ever occur to you that if they forged Jack Kirby's name, they could forge a certificate of authenticity? But I do know at conventions and all that now, too, where you go and get people's autograph, that sometimes some conventions have a little notarized certificate of authenticity to have but the bottom line is you never know. Right. You can never really know. But yes, in Walt's case, yes, other people, they came up with that very distinctive lettering, and I think you can even get that font, for your computer. But yes, the artists would do that most often. But Walt would still autograph things, sure. And Walt would still do a quick little. If he was on a trip or something like that, he'd draw a quick little Mickey head, on a napkin or on the back of a menu and autograph it. And the funny story, of course, was when they were doing Saludos Amigos, and Walt was in South America, and he was at this press conference, and this little boy ran up and shoved a piece of paper at him, Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse. And so Walt drew Mickey's head and autographed it. And the little boy looked at it and goes, "That's not Mickey Mouse." And he tears up the paper and runs away. Because at that time, they had done Fantasia. So Mickey's now got pupils in his eyes, and he's a little fleshier, especially around the cheeks and all that. But Walt knew how to draw the Mickey Mouse from the 1930s, and here it is, 39 or so, and so he's drawing this, and I've drawn Mickey Mouse. This is Mickey Mouse, and the little kid goes, "That's not the Mickey Mouse I know."
And look, the thing I love about this and talking about Walt, and the reason why I want to do this now, and not just because it's birthday, is because there's countless stories, Jim, and I think that not only are you an incredible, collector of those stories, but the way that you tell and retell and share them, not just on the show, but in the book is a big reason why I wanted to
I want to create that humanity. And again, I also want to honor Diane Disney Miller. She was a great supporter of my writing and research. She was very, very kind, but again, she wanted Walt to be seen as a human being, not this, not Colonel Sanders or Betty Crocker or something like this. Walt was a human being. You want to get that. And again, there's so much misinformation, and we're losing people every day who knew Walt. So there are fewer and fewer people who can come up and defend Walt. So in the book, I have 12 chapters where I debunk, myths about Walt Disney, that he was frozen, that he was anti-Semitic, that he hated women and all. And again, I don't just debunk by saying, well, Walt wouldn't have done that. I try to get documentation. So like Walt was not frozen, I point out that I talked to Bob Nelson, who owned the only cryogenics company existing in the world when Walt passed away, and they still weren't licensed to do this. But I talked to him, and he said, look, just use common sense. Walt passed away, and they kept him laying in the hospital bed, for a couple of hours so that the family could gather, and say their goodbyes. If you're going to cryogenically freeze somebody, you've got to do that immediately when they die. Because the deterioration sets in, or you've got to do it just before they die. And I tracked down the Forest Lawn embalmer who signed and put his license number and all that on Walt's death certificate. And he said, yes, Walt was cremated, and it was very clear this is what he wanted done, and I hear all these stories. Oh yeah, he was frozen and he was buried under Pirates of the Caribbean. And so I tracked down that. Why would you bury somebody under Pirates of the Caribbean?
Why not?
Of
course.
It's because when Walt died, they were building Pirates of the Caribbean. So in theory, again, Imagineers call this logical erroneous conclusion. That's the phrase they have, where you put 2 and 2 together and you end up with 7. It looks. Oh yeah. Oh yes. That's the ring that was thrown out. Of the attic. No, that was actually where the metal pole was. And they were so cheap they just cut it off. At ground level there instead of yanking the whole thing out. So I have 12 chapters going through that Walt was not a Nazi sympathizer. And one of the strangest ones that I debunk, and we've heard this on TV, I actually heard this on TV not too long ago, that Walt, in his will, said that the first man who gets pregnant or gives birth would get the entire Disney company, or would get all of Walt Disney World, or would get all of the Walt. And first off, this is easy to debunk because Walt's will is a public document. Any of you can track this down and read. There is nothing even close to that. Second off, Walt didn't own Walt Disney World or Disneyland or the Disney Company. He was a stockholder, but he didn't own this. He didn't own his own company. So he couldn't, give it away. And in the will, you see that in terms of his estate there, half of it's given to Cal Arts, the other half, to family there. And then you've just got to use some common sense and go, look, Walt was a conservative Midwest man. And despite his curiosity with new technology, does it really make sense that he would go, yes, if a man gets pregnant, he can have everything that I have.
He would have had to give it to Arnold Schwarzenegger in 1994 when Junior came out with Danny DeVito.
But you know, I just heard this on TV. You know, because a while ago there was that guy who claimed he was pregnant or whatever.
Right.
You know, and yes, well, Disney is going to do. Well, it's like the old. Sometimes a story is so good that you can't kill it. You know, in the book. Secret Stories at Disneyland that I wrote. You know, tough book to write because everybody and their mother has written a book about Disneyland. Everybody and their mother has a website or a podcast, you know, about Disneyland. So I took it as a challenge from my publisher, and it's like, okay, I'm going to write about Disneyland, but I'm going to make sure that I don't tell the same stories that everybody else does, or if it is the same story, I'm going to tell it from a different perspective or tell the truth. Huge amount of time to do this. But in there, I talk about babies born at Disneyland. And the rumor started that if you give birth at Disneyland, your child gets a lifetime pass to all the Disney parks. That's the rumor that is out there. And so one of the stories I recount in the book is this woman who literally went into labor and locked herself in the bathroom because she thought if she gave birth, her child would get a lifetime pass. And the story of the nurses, you know, from first aid, knocking on the door and trying to explain, no, that's an urban myth, you know. But sometimes some stories are so good, you know, you can't kill them. And again, you know, today you've got a whole generation that what they know about Walt Disney is watching Family Guy or Robot Chicken, you know, who are constantly making jokes about Walt being anti-Semitic, you know, or you know, a Nazi sympathizer. Walt wasn't anti-Semitic. Marty Sklar was Jewish. The Sherman brothers are Jewish. Kay Kamen, who ran merchandise, he's Jewish. Harry Teitel, who was doing all the live action films there, producing all of it, Jewish. Walt didn't care. You can do the job. That's fine. Your personal life is your personal life. And speaking of the Sherman Brothers, let's give a shout out to Richard's newest book, which is A Kiss Goodnight, which is illustrated by Floyd Norman. And so this is a children's book, but it's for children of all ages, basically about how Walt, as a child, was fascinated by fireworks, and so that's why we have fireworks at Disneyland, to give everyone just that final kiss goodnight, you know, to close out the experience.
I love it.
But Jim, while you're ordering that, also order Call Me Walt by Jim Corcus.
Exactly. If you go to www.radio.com/callmewalt, it'll take you right there to where you get Jim's book. And look, Jim, one of the things I love about this book is it does clarify a lot of these myths. It shows that, you know, Walt led very, very far from a perfect life. It was oftentimes tragic. It was oftentimes difficult. And I think there's a lot of not just stories, but lessons we can glean from it as well. But I think there's a lot of things that are fascinating, not just about the company, but about the man. Again,
when you read the book, those of you who are buying the book, I'm warning you ahead of time. There is no mention of Mickey Mouse. There is no mention of Disneyland. There's no mention of audio animatronics. There's no mention of Snow White and the Seven. But there's several paragraphs about how Walt had a terrible sinus condition and had to go in at least once a week, sometimes more, to get his sinuses drained. And that in the last years of his life, he was in tremendous pain, including dental pain. And so sometimes when he would lash out at people, and again, Walt doesn't need to be deified, but he doesn't need to be demonized either. Right. So I have chapters about Walt's temper and making fun of others, and the wounded bear, which is what they called him when, you know, he was in a bad mood, because a wounded bear, you know, will lash out.
Don't poke the wounded bear. Absolutely.
Don't poke the wounded bear. Don't poke a bear, period, but don't poke a wounded bear, because, you know, he's feeling so bad that will do it. But some of that is because Walt when you're feeling bad physically, it's hard to keep up that nice guy, friendly front as that's going on. I'm hoping that there's enough people out there who are interested in Walt as a real person to buy this, but I could be absolutely wrong. I run into a lot of people, young people, who really don't know who Walt was, who really don't even know everything he did in animation and live action and things like that. So,
well, hopefully this serves as a not so short teaser trailer to that book and some of the other stories that are in there.
We're talking forever. We're wrapping up here now, and again, it's the holiday season, so I hope people will enjoy their holidays, and as you have pointed out, I hope people will be thankful, and I hope people will think about the angels they have had in their life and go and just take a moment and thank that person, for that kind word, or not crushing the dream, or picking up the tab at lunch or whatever, is something that has made life better. And remember that you're an angel in somebody else's life too, maybe a lot of somebody's. And it's not that hard to do good in the world. It's not that hard to be just a little extra patient, or say that kind word, or hold the door open, or and actually you're enriching your own life by doing that.
Well, I will take your advice, Jim Korkis, and thank you. And I don't like Thanksgiving because
so you're holding the door open for me now. Yes, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. All right.
Understand what I mean by this. I don't necessarily like Thanksgiving for the same reasons I don't like Mother's Day, Father's Day, and all because I think you should be thankful and grateful each and every day, as I always am for you. You have always been very kind to me.
And
you've always been very kind to me, and you've always been very supportive of me, and I will never forget that. And I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your friendship, and I love having you on and the stories you have to share.
I love being on, and as I said, I'm thankful for your listeners, and I'm thankful for those listeners who come up to me and say things like, "Yeah, I listened to the Parade show, and I just love listening to you and Lou, and sometimes I have to listen to the show a second time, to get everything." You guys are important. You're keeping the magic of Disney alive. You're keeping the magic of Walt alive, and thanks to Lou for providing this forum, so that information can get out there. And so, God bless us, everyone.
You're a good man, Jimmy Korkis. Until next time, thank you so much. Time for our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, where I invite you to test your knowledge, not just of Walt Disney World's history, but sometimes the details, what you see, what you hear, maybe even what you eat. If you think you know the answer, you can enter via our online forum for a chance to win a Disney prize package. Before we get to this week's question, we're going to go back, review last week's, and select our winner. So last week, as we celebrated 500-ish episodes of WDW Radio, I wanted to ask you a question about the show to see how well you knew it, or maybe to invite you to go back and find an episode you hadn't looked at before. And the question I asked you simply was to tell me, what was the very first top 10 show that we ever did? And again, thanks to the hundreds of you who got this correct, shared some fun stories and memories about how you found the show, but a lot of you knew that the top 10 was Spookiest Moments, and that was back on show 38, and that was back in 2007. The first top 10 I did with little Timmy Foster. I took all of the correct entries, randomly selected one, and again, you were playing for my 102 Ways to Save Money for Not Walt Disney World book, all 7 of my virtual audio walking tours of the Magic Kingdom, both of which, by the way, you can find in the WDW Radio shop. They're on sale, celebrating 10 years. They're just $10 each. I'm also going to send you a Magic Band cover, some stickers, and a WDW Radio pop socket for your phone and stand. And last week's winner randomly selected is Jess Adams. So Jess, congratulations. You used the online form, so I have your mailing address. I'll get your prize package out to you right away. If you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So because this week's show is about Walt Disney, the question's going to be about Walt Disney, but also about food, because I'm Lou and I'm always hungry. And as we talked about on the show a little bit, Walt's imprint and legacy really can be found throughout the parks and resorts. In the past, I've actually done shows about finding Walt in Walt Disney World. If you go back to show 298, that's actually the title of the show, and places and ways you can find sort of Walt's imprint and details and references to Walt throughout Walt Disney World. But sometimes you might find Walt in places that he may not have ever even visited or envisioned. In fact, there's a lot of locations that have a connection to Walt in one way or another. For example, this is where it brings it back to food. Paddlefish, the restaurant in Disney Springs, was once known as Fulton's Crab House. Before that, however, it was a restaurant known by a different name. So this week I invite you to tell me, what was this floating restaurant originally known as, and maybe how was it connected to Walt? Your answer for the first should give you the answer for the second. So tell me, what was Paddlefish originally known as in Disney Springs? You have until Sunday, December 3rd at 11:59 p.m. to go to WDW Radio.com, click on this week's podcast, use the online form there, and again, you're going to play for the book, the audio tours, the Magic Band cover, the stickers, and the pop socket. So good luck and have fun. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in this and every week. Thanks again to some of the new and longtime members of the WDW Radio Nation, including some of the platinum members like Father Christopher, Sean Embry, Frank, Ashley, and Frankie, Gary Zarilli, Paul Reddick, Scott McLean, and Jeff Knoll. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. If you want to find out how you can join the nation and get monthly rewards, including scavenger hunts, we have a private Facebook group. You'll get personalized Magic Band covers. There's logo gear, shirts, monthly care packages from Walt Disney World, live video group calls, and lots more. You can visit WDWRadio.com/support. And don't forget that a portion of your contribution will go to our Dream Team project to benefit the Make-A-Wish Foundation of America. Also, don't forget to join the community, like our page at facebook.com/WDWRadio, and be a member of our Facebook group as well. Really be part of the conversation as well. Please also join me every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for WDW Radio Live, where I do a live video broadcast from the parks, sometimes from the home studio. Also, be sure to turn on notifications. This way you'll find out other times that I go live, sometimes out in the parks or special events. You can also connect with me other places on social. I am at Lou Mongello on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. Those are where I'm most active. And subscribe to our YouTube page at youtube.com/WDW Radio. Of course, as much as I love connecting with you online, I think that nothing beats a handshake and a hug. That's why I continue to do monthly meetups in Walt Disney World. I don't have December scheduled as yet. Again, to find out when and where that's going to be, not just to tune into the show and follow me on social, but make sure you check out the events page at facebook.com/WDW Radio. You can also find out how you can join us in Alaska on our Disney cruise in June 2018. We have one spot left for our Backstage Magic Adventures by Disney in October, and there's other special events coming up as well. Also, please visit LouMongello.com if I could maybe come to speak to your business, to your conference, or to your school, or work with you one-on-one to help you turn your passion into your profession with personal mentoring or small group coaching. I'd love to help you get from where you are to where you want to be and turn what you love into what you do. Again, you can find everything over at LouMongello.com. Thanks as always to Becky and her team over at Mousefan Travel, my official recommended travel provider wherever you are going in the Disney world or outside. She and her team of agents give you the best possible service and prices available. You can visit them at mousefantravel.com. And of course, little Timmy Foster's over at celebrationspress.com, where you can subscribe and order back issues to Celebrations magazine. And as always, my friend, and you are my friend, whether we have met yet or not, all I ask is that if you like the show, please help spread the word. Let others know about it. And that's how our community and family will grow. So tweet out a link and that you're listening to this episode, or pick your favorite episode and share it on Facebook. And if you can, take just 30 seconds to rate and review the show over on iTunes. Thanks to you, we have more than 1,300 five-star reviews. It's incredibly helpful to the show. I want to thank some recent reviewers like Paul Matthew W. says, it's immersive and entertaining. Lou's podcast is great. I listen to every episode while I walk for exercise. He covers topics with lots of information and attention to detail. So every episode is sort of like a documentary, especially with the expert guests he has on the show. However, don't think for a moment these are boring history lessons about Walt Disney World. Lou keeps it very upbeat, humorous, and entertaining. He also keeps the podcast full of optimism and positive energy, something we could all use a lot more of. Thanks, Lou. Please keep them coming. Paul, thank you. Nate Elmo 1987 says, thank you, Lou. You're a little piece of the magic to my day and the best part of my week. Wow, thank you. I hope I get to meet you someday. Same as well. Keep up the amazing top 10s. Thank you, Nate. I hope to meet you in the future as well. K-Barn8 says, the bee's knees. Lou, your show is unlike any other I've listened to. Your knowledge and kind Disney spirit are inspiring and keep me coming back for more. Thanks for being the pixie dust in my everyday life. And Wise Oldman says, it brings the magic to your home. The WDW Radio podcast captures the magic of Walt Disney World, and if you're fortunate enough to get the magic of Disney, then the show embodies that sense. Lou's description of all parts of Walt Disney World, sheer vastness of knowledge of the history and details of Walt Disney World lets you escape into that sense of being there. Lou, thank you. Your energy and enthusiasm is infectious. This is the best Disney podcast available. I thoroughly enjoy every episode, and being new to the show, I'm trawling back through the old episodes, many hours of fun and laughs. Thank you. Thank you, Wise Old Man, Kay, Nate, and Paul. I appreciate every single one of you. If you want to rate and review the show, just search for it in iTunes or go to wdwradio.com/iTunes. It'll show you exactly how to do it. And again, continuing in this sense and season, and something that I think should continue all year long, of Thanksgiving, I am thankful and grateful to and for you. I am a better person. I'm a better man because of you and the things that you allow me to do. And I think that today and every day is an opportunity for you to get better. Don't waste it, and don't wait. And I hope that you have your best week ever. So until next time, thanks again. See ya.
Hey, Lou Mongello. This is Terrence O'Neill, and I'm with my wife, Natalie, daughter, Allison, and Danielle, and we are on the People Mover right now as we speak. And we just wanted to call and say hi, and thanks for all your great podcasts, and we can't wait to listen to more, and hopefully you can hear us over the narration of the People Mover, but have a great, magical day. Bye.
Hello, Lou Mongello. It's Gabby Laxamana from Columbia, Maryland. Just calling in to say hey. I'm just really missing Disney World right now. This morning it was a crisp 28 degrees here in Maryland, and I was missing the 80-degree weather that Joe and I were enjoying just 2 weeks ago in Florida. We were there for the Wine and Dine Half Marathon, and thank you and Becky again for our sweaty hugs right when we needed it towards the end of the race. I just have to say, after we passed you guys right outside of Epcot, as we were running away, Joe turns to me and says, oh my gosh, Lou Mongello remembered me. He said, hey, Joe, and I couldn't believe he remembered my name. And he was just super excited about it, and I figured I would let you know. Other than that, have a great rest of the week, and early happy Thanksgiving to you and your family and all of the WDW Radio listeners. We are also, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to say we're so thankful for what you do and for this community. And it's just so nice to have a little bit of Disney here when we're freezing at home. Thank you so much for all you do. Have a great week. Thanks. Bye.
Hey, Lou, Stan Solo calling from snowy Winnipeg, Canada. I'm taking a break from having some ketchup chips, poutine, and Timbits to congratulate you on your 500th episode. Looking forward to hearing the next 500. Have a good day, eh?
Hi, Lou. This is Danielle from North Carolina, and I would like to say that my favorite part about Spaceship Earth is the printing press scene. Bye.
Hello, Lou Mongello, Darlene Nagy from West Seneca, New York, calling in to give you some of the countdowns. We have 183 days until we hit the May trip for my birthday in Walt Disney World. And then you have, ready, 212 days until that Disney Alaska cruise. Now, everybody that's going on that cruise, be set and ready, because Lou and Becky always make it a fun-filled adventure. When we were there, we seen Tracy Arms, Skagway, Juneau, and Ketchikan. And we got to go on a whale watch. We did a Showgirls, Good Time Girls Showgirls walk. And we did a duck boat tour. If you'd never been on a duck boat, that was a lot of fun. So anything you need to know, just ask, and I will share what we did. If you are in the area in October, we are going to be down there the first week of October into the world. Maybe we can all meet up. Have a wonderful, fabulous weekend. Happy Thanksgiving from West Seneca, New York, and Darlene Maggie. I love you guys all. And always stay positive like Lou says. See you real soon.